This
is TLV1.
TLV1 radio.
Great mixture.
I like television.
This is still V1.
This is
Tel Aviv is a beautiful city.
Great city, great radio.
TLV1.
This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers, researchers, documentary filmmakers and other people of all trades and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. And on our show today, our first guest will be Professor Stuart Cohen, a political scientist specializing in diplomatic and military history, who will tell us about how World War I, of all historical events, radically changed the attitude of Jews towards warfare. Our second guest will be Professor Deborah Dwork, a historian of the Holocaust and the director of the Strassler Family Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Clark University in the United States. She'll be talking about the production of knowledge about the Holocaust in an academic environment and how it affects the way it is perceived and received in the public sphere. This is our show today. Do stay with us. We'll be back right after this musical interlude.
Surprises.
You're listening to the Tel Aviv Review here on TLV1. I am Gilad Halpern. Welcome back. I am now joined by Professor Stuart Cohen. He is Professor Emeritus of Political Studies at Bar-Ilan University and currently the chairperson of the Government and Politics Department at Ashkelon Academic College. He specializes in diplomatic history and military studies as well as many other fields. And we're here to discuss another aspect of the First World War. It's a topic we've discussed here on the Tel Aviv Review on a number of occasions as we're marking 100 years since it broke out. And that topic is how and to what extent it instigated a change in the way Jews perceived warfare and military. Hello, Stuart, and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you for having me.
So here in Israel, we're taught that the so-called muscular Jew, with a gun in one hand and a shovel in the other, is a direct result of the Zionist revolution. My question to you is, to what extent does it do injustice to historical fact?
To a large extent. This is a very introspective way of looking at things, and it ignores, as many Zionist myths ignore, what has gone on, what is going on in the diaspora. And I think, as you said in your introduction, that we have to take a broader view, especially when talking about military matters. And there has been a revolution in Jewish attitudes towards matters military over the past few generations, but it's not all due to the Zionist movement or to events in the land of Israel. For roughly 18 centuries after the failure of the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135 CE, when the Romans, having already destroyed the temple, razed Jerusalem, then suppressed with cruelty and vigor the Bar Kokhba rebellion, for about 1800 years thereafter, Judaism was in a trauma as far as military matters was concerned, so much so that Jews not only very rarely served in the army, the sight of a Jewish soldier was virtually unknown, but also Jewish thinkers, Jewish rabbis, Jewish poets very rarely mentioned warfare. Even biblical commentaries, when they came to address matters such as King David's martial exploits, which are very clearly described in the Bible, they really airbrushed out of the account the military side of things, and they turned David into a scholar and his soldiers into students, and very clearly the idea was that Jews should avoid contact.
Do you ascribe this to some sort of trauma, or was it just, a reflection of the current situation, which was light years away from the military condition?
No, it's true that they were light years away from military service and the possibility of military service, but also I think there was a deep scar. The lesson learned from the Bar Kokhba rebellion and what had gone on before was that Jews should not undertake military action. Salvation would not come through force of arms, but through God's divine intervention. Even Hanukkah, which we're celebrating as we speak, even Hanukkah was, which is clearly a military victory as well as anything else, was reinterpreted, and the emphasis was placed not on the victories of Judah the Maccabee and his brothers, but on the miracle of the can of oil, and that became the focus of the festival rather than any military. Now,
and that state of mind persisted well into the modern era as well.
It began to change. It began to change in Europe, Western Europe, with emancipation, when Jews were for the first time offered the possibility of citizenship, and some thought that they would speed that process and the integration would become easier had they also served in the military. And this was connected with events going on in Europe at the time, when in any case military service and citizenship, with an equation was drawn. It happened first in Holland, then in the United States. Napoleon made this very clear.
We're talking about the late 18th,
early 19th century. And as the 19th century progressed and conscription became enforced in many countries in Western Europe, not all, but many countries in Western Europe, and then we began to see more and more Jews not only serving, but also deciding not to try and avoid service, which had been the case beforehand in the early days of conscription.
What about Eastern Europe?
Oh, very good question. In Eastern Europe, there was a form of conscription under the Tsarist Empire, when it wasn't universal by any means, but certainly an attempt was made to enlist Jews at a very young age. Jewish youths, 11, 12 years old, were very often taken from their villages and families and then conscripted for something like 20, 25 years. These became known as cantonists, for the cantons. And there are numerous stories in Yiddish literature and early Hebrew literature about the fate of the unfortunates.
Because it was one way to clamp down on the Jewish community, right? One way to torture them. It was another
form of suppressing, of persecuting Jews. There's a lot of literature now become available as to who actually were these cantonists and where did they come from. Because what we now know is that, as I said before, conscription wasn't universal. The Tsar's officers would come to a village and say, we require from this village 20, for argument's sake, 20 conscripts. Well, then how do you choose the 20? And it's clear from anguished correspondence between rabbis and amongst other leaders of the community that by and large, the conscripts came from orphans, children of widows, the poorer elements of the community, people who really had no means of defending themselves. It was very, very rare for the son of a prominent rabbi or a community personality to be drafted, which was not the case in Western Europe, where in Western Europe you did begin to see more and more.
Now, to what extent is the First World War then a turning point in all this?
The First World War is very much a turning point for several reasons. First of all, Jews were drafted in unprecedented numbers. Conscription was imposed in all countries that participated in the war, including ultimately the United Kingdom, which had a long-standing tradition of not imposing conscription. A volunteer army was the British tradition, but in 1916, finally, even the British had to say, we just haven't got enough soldiers, and we're not going to obtain enough soldiers without conscription. Conscription was imposed in all the belligerent states. So Jews obviously were included there. That's one reason. The second reason is, which is much more tragic, is that in many respects the First World War was a Jewish civil war. Jews were fighting against Jews on both sides of the lines. This was true of Jews were fighting in the British and the French armies against Germans. German Jews were fighting not only against the British and the French, but also against Russians. Russian Jews were fighting not only against the Germans, but against Austro-Hungarians. So we had many instances.
What about Turkey in this?
There were Jews in the Ottoman army, very much so. Yes, a large number of Jews in the Ottoman army. In fact, David Ben Gurion at one time was drafted into the Ottoman army.
During the war?
During the First World War. A large number of Jews were drafted, and we have now memoirs that have come out about Jews serving in the Ottoman army, and of course the connection with Palestine was very great. And so in many respects, the First World War was a Jewish civil war. And we have numerous stories of what happened when Jew met Jew on the battlefield. And would they in fact go and kill each other? We know of a Christmas truce between the British forces and German forces on the Western Front in December 1914. We don't know of a Yom Kippur truce,
right?
Which would have been which would have been something to expect, but we just don't.
Would it? But were they were they enough Jewish soldiers to...
there were enough Jewish soldiers, definitely enough Jewish soldiers, but they just weren't concentrated enough. And I don't think that they were also self-confident enough to go up to their officers and say, today is a Jewish day of rest and we're not going to fight there. And we can assure you that the Jews on the other side won't fight. That didn't happen. We have numerous accounts, for instance, of Jewish chaplains. I've been through the papers of one who served in the British Army, who, when they came across German soldiers who had been killed in the war, were obviously Jewish because they carried some sort of memento amongst a Star of David or a prayer book in their packs. And then the Jewish chaplain records that he was told, "This is one of yours.
Right.
Bury him."
But what about the attitude itself? We were talking about the trauma that the Jews carried for centuries. How did that begin to change?
That also began to change during the First World War. The First World War is the first instance we have of a Jewish fighting force being established as a Jewish fighting force, named as a Jewish fighting force. I'm talking about what was called then the Jewish Legion, which in fact was just a number of battalions. Jewish Legion, which was set up under the auspices of the British Army for the express purpose of galvanizing Jews to fight for the Western Allies. And the Jews saw it as a way of, or Jabotinsky, who was very instrumental in it, saw it as a way of advancing the Zionist cause. So this was very much a reaction against the tradition, which had said, don't use force to obtain political ends, certainly not the redemption of Palestine. And here Jabotinsky is saying, well, now we have to do so. And this was the first ever attempt to do so. And that the Jewish Brigade first saw action in the Gallipoli campaign, the Zionist Mule Corps, and thereafter, much later, it came to Palestine. And was here at the end of the war. It didn't participate in the liberation of Palestine, but under Allenby, but it served functions, police functions and logistic functions thereafter. So we have here and there was a fourth major change, and this is something which is now persisting into the present day and has enormous repercussions. I think for the first time, rabbis, beginning with just one or two, rabbis began to study the question of how does Jewish orthodoxy approach warfare? After all, warfare is an arena in which killing is the most prominent activity.
Yeah.
And yet there is a commandment, thou shalt not kill. Now, this for a religious person presents an enormous problem, not only for a Jewish religious person, but all religious persons. Under what circumstances does killing become not simply permitted, but because the war is a just war, the war is a war for aims which are sublime, to what extent does killing in fact become a commandment? Something which one has to do, not just is permitted to do, but has to do. And behind that is an even bigger question: does warfare have its own rules? Is warfare subject to the normal rules of conduct which we expect in daily life of any person? This is a subject which Christian tradition has wrestled with for centuries, and naturally so, since Christians have been non-stop involved in wars, not only amongst themselves but also against Muslims. The Jewish tradition hadn't touched this for centuries, and suddenly in the First World War, this became a burning issue. I think the first person to really make a breakthrough in that respect was somebody who eventually became the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of mandatory Palestine, the elder Rabbi Cook, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, who in the First World War was... it's an interesting story. He was stranded in Switzerland, of all places. It's
a good place to be stranded during the war.
Well, not really, because his family was here in Jaffa, and he had to get his family out, had to bring them to Switzerland, and what's he going to do? He had nowhere to go. But he's stranded in Switzerland for the first 2 years of the war. Eventually, in the end of 1916, he moved to London. But in the first 2 years of the war, he's in Switzerland, and there he is sitting in this island of tranquility, surrounded by an exploding world, which is going up in flames, and he's finally has to...
Interestingly enough, he was the founding father of the settler movement.
No, that was his son. That was his son.
Right, okay.
No,
Sorry, I'm mixing it up.
he's not. No. His son was really the settler movement, who used many of his father's writings.
But isn't he the
he was
man behind religious
Zionism?
Zionism?
He was certainly a religious Zionist. But that was not necessarily connected with this. He was what he was trying to study was what is the meaning of warfare and how does one approach warfare. And he really made a breakthrough. He was in correspondence with other rabbis in Switzerland, and he really made a breakthrough in that correspondence when he came to the conclusion that warfare is different. In other words, one can't use the normal norms of halachic jurisprudence to study or to analyze matters affecting warfare. For instance, take the most blatant, is a person allowed to kill, or is a person allowed to place his own life in danger under normal circumstances? Judaism or Orthodox Judaism says definitely not. Under warfare, definitely yes. So warfare is a separate category of behavior. And from once you open that door, then all sorts of things flow, because if warfare is a separate category of behavior, then does it mean, for instance, that on the Sabbath I do not have to observe the normal rules of Sabbath behavior? If I haven't got food to eat, does it mean I don't have to observe the normal rules of kosher food? If I haven't got anywhere to live, does it mean to say that I don't have to put a mezuzah on? I mean, that from here one goes, the ramifications are enormous. Cook didn't go that far. He didn't explore all these ramifications, but he did make this essential breakthrough. And I think that what's happened in Israel today, beginning with Rabbi Gorin, the first IDF chief rabbi, and progressing thereafter, right down to the present day, is that more and more we are seeing rabbis who are drawing these conclusions that warfare is an autonomous activity, an autonomous branch of the halachic tradition, and trying to reinvent.
But here we're talking about, I wouldn't say modern Orthodox, but we're talking about so-called religious Zionists. What is the attitude? Has there been any change within ultra-Orthodox rabbis, thinkers?
Very interesting. Ultra-Orthodoxy has almost unanimously kept to the tradition which says, do not discuss warfare, do not touch warfare, don't even let the word pass your lips, certainly don't commit anything to writing. Judaism would have nothing to do with physical violence. We are dependent entirely upon God's intervention. Everything.
Which explains their behavior to this day.
Which means,
the
yes,
army.
from which follows that, of course, military service becomes not only not necessary, but an anathema in many respects. Right. So you won't find. I can only think of one or two very, very minor exceptions. You won't find ultra-Orthodox Haredi rabbis really addressing the sort of questions that now confront and bother modern Orthodox national religious rabbis.
All right, Professor Stuart Cohen, I'm afraid this is all we have time for, so thank you so much for coming on the Tel Aviv Review. You are Professor Emeritus of Political Studies at Bar-Ilan University and the Chairperson of the Government and Politics Department at Ashkelon Academic College. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Por la blanda arena que lame el mar, tu pequeña abuela no vuelve más. Un sendero solo de pena y silencio llegó hasta el agua profunda. Un sendero solo de penas mudas llegó hasta la espuma. Sabe Dios qué angustia te acompañó, qué dolores viejos cayó tu voz. para recostarse arrullada en el canto de las caracolas marinas. La canción que canta en el fondo oscuro del mar, la caracola. Te vas, Alfonsina, con tu soledad. ¿Qué poemas nuevos fuiste a buscar? Y una voz antigua de viento y de sal te requiebra el alma y la está llevando, y te vas hacia allá como en sueño, dormida Alfonsina vestida de mar. Cinco sirenitas te llevarán por caminos de algas y de coral, y fosforescentes caballos marinos harán una ronda a tu lado, y los habitantes del agua van a jugar pronto a tu lado. Bájame la lámpara un poco más, déjame que duerma nodriza en paz. Y si ama a él, no le digas que estoy, dile que Alfonsina no vuelve. Y si ama a él, no le digas nunca que estoy, di que me he ido. Te vas, Alfonsina, con tu soledad. ¿Qué poemas nuevos fuiste a buscar? Y una voz antigua de viento y de sal te requiebra el alma y la está llevando, y te vas hacia allá como en sueño, dormida Alfonsina vestida de mar. Da 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 da. Te vas, Alfonsina, con tu soledad. ¿Qué poemas nuevos fuiste a buscar? Y una voz antigua de viento y de sal te requiebra el alma y la está llevando, y te vas hacia allá como en sueño, dormida Alfonsina vestida de mar. Y te vas hacia allá como en sueño, dormida Alfonsina vestida de mar.
You're listening to the Tel Aviv Review here on TLV1. Welcome back. I am now joined here in the studio by Professor Deborah Dwork. She's a historian of the Holocaust and the director of the Strassler Family Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Clark University in the United States. Hello, Deborah, and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So we're here to discuss your current work, which focuses perhaps on a meta-analysis of your own field of expertise, and that is academic research about the Holocaust. Now, this is, I'm assuming, a question that every historian who deals with issues that are within the realm of the interest of the public has to address somehow, and that is, what is the role of academic research in the production of knowledge about a certain historical episode? In our case, it's the Holocaust, as opposed to the media discourse or collective memory and similar things.
I really hope that the knowledge that we produce at the Strassler Center, and by we I mean not solely my professorial colleagues, but much more importantly, our doctoral students. So I really hope that the knowledge that we produce helps you helps you in the media, helps people who are making documentary movies, helps people who are making not documentary movies, but movies that deal with episodes from the past which are rooted in historical knowledge. We want them to get it right. Did you have you by any chance been watching Mad Men?
Yes,
the TV series?
Absolutely, about the reconstruction of a 60s office environment.
Exactly. And one of the things that everyone appreciates is how every detail is correct. That's what we want to be able to do.
But as opposed to Mad Men, the Holocaust has a certain political context or ramifications to it. It's not just reconstructing it, it's also learning lessons from it and, the real historical value of learning it.
Do you think so? So let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
The first thing is that, of course, our job is not to be detail people for TV shows. Of course not. We are involved in scholarly research, but what we hope is that that scholarly research will inform civil society and will also inform cultural production today. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is you talked about lessons from the Holocaust. I don't see the Holocaust as a history lesson. I see the Holocaust as the greatest catastrophe that Western civilization both permitted and endured. And it's our job, it's our task to understand that, to understand how it came to be. So, may I continue?
But drawing lessons is something that is so inherent to your work, whereas if you take the Mad Men example, I mean, drawing lessons from the way things were done in the 60s is not as important.
Maybe. Of course you are right. No, of course you're right. Of course you are right.
Yeah.
Although I must say that when I'm watching Mad Men, I do want to say to the women characters, hold on.
Yeah.
The women's movement is coming.
Yeah.
Liberation will happen. So, but let's get off Mad Men because really we're talking about the Holocaust. So, back to what you were talking about, and that has to do really with moral lessons. And I think that's where you're going with this. It's about moral lessons. My response to that is that there are many episodes from history that could teach us moral lessons, like the Civil Rights Movement, like the Enlightenment era and the French Revolution, like the Russian Revolution for that matter. I'm looking for something else when I study the Holocaust. When I study the Holocaust, I'm looking for the underlying structures which permitted this atrocity. And it's those underlying processes and structures that I would like to lay bare in the hope of either humanitarian intervention in episodes today or, better yet, political prevention.
Again, I want to go back to the academic realm as opposed to other realms. Quite a few years back, I interviewed someone who was very much involved in Holocaust education. That was in the UK, not in Israel. So it's slightly different. But one thing that she told me that really struck me was that they avoid showing school kids Schindler's List in lessons about the Holocaust because it creates this impression. Because it's in black and white and because it's based on real life events, that it is some way a documentary, and it ignores the fact. I mean, the kids ignore the fact or are unaware of the fact that it is dramatized. So this is just one example that I'd like to ask you as someone who deals with academic research, as you say, laying bare the underlying foundations of this episode. Where how do you, as an academic, address this gap between the academic strand and popular culture, for that matter?
What I very much hope is that scholarship will inform these cultural productions.
Sure, but does it happen? I mean, is it already? Right. How do you see it from your perspective?
Right. So, from my perspective, I would agree. I actually would agree with that school teacher. I would not use Schindler's List in the classroom because I would like to take the time, those teaching hours, those very precious teaching hours, to teach the students rather than having them sit there watching a film. So that's the first thing.
Okay.
The second thing is that actually I'm really glad the film was made. What I have found is what I found at that time was because it was such a commercial success, increasing numbers of undergraduate students signed up to take the courses we offer, their interest having been prompted by seeing this film, to which I say terrific.
Yeah. But at the same time, there were many, many other people who thought they learned something new about the Holocaust, but then how faithful is it to the actual thing?
Correct. You're absolutely correct. There's an implicit assumption in what you are saying, which is that it is not 100% faithful.
Is it a problem, is my question.
Is it a problem? It is a problem if that is the sole source of information, clearly.
And quite
no
often
question.
it is.
All too often it is. In the United States, however, over 50% of school children live in states with either mandated education about the history of the Holocaust or recommended education about the history of the Holocaust. So over 50% of school children in the United States, for that over 50%, Schindler's List is not the sole source of information.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also remember reading some account by a historian who said that when he teaches undergraduates about the First World War in the Middle East, there's always a few students who pretend to know everything because they watched Lawrence of Arabia.
Yes, right. I can. My example would not be Schindler's List. It would be the Diary of Anne Frank.
Okay.
How many students have I met in the course of my years who say, "Oh, I know about the Holocaust. I read the Diary of Anne Frank," and my response is, "Okay, let's unpack that." There is one particular in which her story speaks for the vast majority of Jewish children at that time, which is that she did not survive. 90% of Jewish children alive in 1939 did not survive to
90%?
90% to 1945. 90% were murdered. So in this particular, her fate mirrors exactly that of 90% of her co-religionists. But she had the opportunity to hide, which the vast majority did not. She hid with her entire family, which the vast majority did not, and so on and so on.
Yeah, but other than those, I'd say, technical details in her story, are there more, I would say, substantial misperceptions about the Holocaust that people learn through the Anne Frank story that you're trying to address in your teaching?
Yes, and that is that of her whole diary, it is the uplifting narratives which are privileged. I believe that at base or at heart or fundamentally all people are good. Those were the words of a very wishful young girl. Many adolescents.
Which made her narrative so powerful.
Which made her narrative so powerful,
Yeah.
but also made her narrative so palatable. And And there is a distinction with a difference there.
Absolutely.
Everyone wants to believe that. And so her narrative is privileged. Also, she's extremely gifted. She's an amazingly gifted writer. But it's also what she says which is so acceptable.
I want to take you perhaps to a different aspect of your work. And that is something that has struck me quite often in dealing with Holocaust and genocide within the academia. And that is the title itself, Holocaust and Genocide. To what extent do you academics tend to lump them together and still at the same time separate, because it is, the Holocaust is separate from other genocides in the title of your work. Can you expand on this a bit?
Absolutely. So there are a couple of things that I'd like to say about that. The first is that there are many ways in which human beings can be violent towards each other, against each other, even lethal towards each other. And those span from mass murder to genocide to the Holocaust. I would suggest that you think about it in terms of diseases. You could die of heart disease. You could die of cancer. You could die of diabetes. All of them are lethal, but they are not lethal in exactly the same way. And so what research scientists do is investigate the underlying processes exactly to find either ways of intervention or prevention. So we're back to where we started,
Yes.
which is that that's exactly what we scholars at the Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Clark University, that's exactly what we try to do, which is to study these underlying processes and structures to find productive and constructive ways to intervene, or better, to prevent. You talked about lumping together. It's not so much about lumping together as thinking critically, analytically, also productively, constructively about how knowing about the Armenian genocide, for example, helps us understand aspects of the Holocaust that might not have occurred to us otherwise, and vice versa.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Two students, Umit Kurt and Ștefan Ionescu. Ștefan Ionescu from Bucharest, Romania, wrote his dissertation about the Romanianization of property. It's the local variant of Aryanization.
Okay.
So Romanianization, anti-Semitic Romanianization in Romania during
the
war years.
expropriation of Jewish property.
Expropriation of Jewish property, but also throwing Jews out of their jobs.
Right.
So it's about real estate, and it's also about livelihood, and so on. Umit Kurt, who is Turkish, comes from the southeastern Turkish city of Aintab, fairly near to Syria.
Yeah.
Works on the Armenian genocide, and
Can he go back home?
yes, he can. Yes, he can go back home. And what he's looking at is the role of the local elites in supporting the massacre and death marches of Armenians out of Aintab. And again, what he saw is that the local elites gained much wealth of property, wealth in coin. But what Umit saw was that this canonical image that we have about the Holocaust, the separation of women, children, the elderly, from men, middle-aged and young men, the murder of middle-aged and young men, and the forced march of women, children, and the elderly, that canonical image from the Holocaust, in fact, applied to Aintab in the early years of the 20th century and did not apply to Bucharest 30 years later.
How interesting.
So these two young scholars working side by side, talking about the depredation of the victim population, saw that there were ways in which knowing about each other's work widened their lens and gave them new ways of understanding what happened locally.
Mm-hmm. That's really fascinating, but I'm afraid this is all we have time for. Professor Deborah Dwork, the director of the Strassler Family Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Clark University in the United States. Thank you so much for coming in today, and enjoy your stay in Israel.
Thank you. Pleasure.
That was the Tel Aviv Review for this week. Thank you very much for listening. I am Gilad Halpern, signing off now. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. In the meantime, goodbye.
Have you got color in your cheeks? Do you ever get that feel that you can't shift, the type that sticks around like summits in your teeth? Are there some aces up your sleeve? Have you no idea that you're in deep? I dreamt about you nearly every night this week. How many secrets can you keep? 'Cause there's this tune I found that makes me think of you somehow, and I play it on repeat until I fall asleep, spilling drinks on my settee. Do I wanna know if this feeling flows both ways? Sad to see you go. Sorta hoping that you'd stay. Maybe we both know that the nights were mainly made for saying things that you can't say tomorrow day. Crawling back to you, never thought of calling when you're at you, 'cause I always do. Maybe I'm too busy being lost to fall for somebody new. Now I thought it through, crawling back to you. So have you got the goods? Been wondering if your heart's still open, and if so, I wanna know what time it should. Simmer down and poker up. I'm sorry to interrupt, it's just I'm constantly on the cusp. I've tried been to kiss you. I don't know if you feel the same as I do. We could be together if you wanted to. Do I wanna know if this feeling flows both ways? Sad to see you go. Was sorta hoping that you'd stay.